I did wake up and find her. She'd taken her own life. Hadn't seen it coming. There was no note. There was nothing that gave me any idea. Even in hindsight, there was still nothing that gave me any indication that this was going to happen. The way that I looked at it was, it really hits someone's self-esteem when a person chooses to end their life rather than be with you. At the time, I thought I could probably handle it, but I think later I found out I probably couldn't. I look at undercover as it allowed me to have a full release and just not be me for a while. I enjoyed being Donnie because Donnie was carefree. He had no worries in the world, where Todd had a lot of baggage, a lot of stuff that he was trying to process. And I think Donnie allowed Todd to just be free for a while.
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
Today I'm speaking with Todd Maguire. Todd has spent 27 years with the Queensland Police Service, working across undercover operations, major crime, tactical response, counter-terrorism and bomb detection. He played a key role in dismantling organised crime networks, contributing to more than 500 charges, and received both a certificate of recognition and also a commissioner's citation for his work. But beyond the commendations is a very different story. Todd spent decades on the front line of humanity's darkest moments: violent crime, suicide, fatal accidents, domestic violence, and child abuse. He was often the one knocking on the doors to deliver the devastating news, holding people in their grief and carrying experiences that don't simply fade when the job ends. For a long time, he didn't speak about the toll it took, the trauma, the drinking, the fallout, and living with complex PTSD. Now, through his book, Donnie, Undercover Cop with a Death Wish, Todd is sharing his story with raw honesty, not as someone who has it all figured out, but someone who has lived through it, lost himself, and fought hard to get his way back. Thank you so much for being with us today, Todd.
Thank you, Catherine.
Wow, that is quite a lot you've packed into your life, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a hell of a lot more too, yeah.
So how did you get started in the police force?
It was actually something that I didn't realise I was going to do. I didn't start until I was 23. I thought I was going to do a job in hospitality. I thought I was going to be a publican or a hotel manager. And it was just by chance that a friend of mine sort of said, why don't you give this a go? I sort of got me at a bad time. I was a little bit overworked, and I was working at the Hyatt at Sanctuary Cove on the Gold Coast and working many, many hours. And then a friend of mine said, why don't you just give this a go? So I just shut him up to say, okay, I'll apply. And if I get in, I'll get in. If not, too bad. And I got in. So, and then I never looked back. I actually loved it. I really loved it once I got in, and it was really good.
And tell me, what was it that you loved about it, Todd?
It was the camaraderie. It was the people. It was the characters and the people that I worked with. There were so many different good people. There was minimal bad people that I sort of worked with. Mainly just characters, just funny blokes, funny women, and you just had a lot of fun. You really did have a lot of fun. It was just a good time back it was a late 90s. We just had, we chased crooks and we had a lot of fun doing it. It was very, very much the old play hard and work hard.
And tell me, I'm assuming that you don't start in undercover. Is that something that you are having to apply for after you go through your recruitment? And tell me about it for how someone who has no idea, how does that process work? How do you get into undercover?
Well, the transition for me to go undercover was a very unique sort of way. And that's basically the premise of how this whole book started 25 years later. It started from New Year's Eve on 1999. I'd actually been living with my girlfriend Karen, and we were starting a life. She'd already had a failed marriage, and she had a young boy who was 4, and we'd been living together for 18 months, and things were going quite well until the morning that I woke up on New Year's Day 2000, and she'd taken her life in the garage, and she'd hung herself, and things went south pretty quickly. I'd worked the night shift and I'd picked her up after her going to the New Year's Eve celebrations. And if you remember back then, for all of us people of our age, it was Y2K.
Yeah, the world was going to end. We didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd actually been out the night before with Karen and a few other friends, and we were having dinner before we started work before the men started work at 10 o'clock. And the women went out and had a party and enjoyed themselves, and we kept in contact with them. But at dinner, my old phone was doing like a pocket dial in my jeans, and I pulled it out, and I thought, I'll just lock it, because remember the old 6110s, the Nokias, you had to do the, press OK and star or something to unlock it or lock it. But then I looked at it and it said 666 on it. And I said, hey, look at this, people. Looks like we are going to bloody all die tomorrow. And everyone had a bit of a giggle. They laughed and whatever. Anyway, didn't realise how serious that was going to be the next day. But unfortunately, I did wake up and find her. She'd taken her own life. I hadn't seen it coming. There was no note. There was nothing that gave me any idea, even in hindsight, even knowing what I know now, there was still nothing that gave me any indication that this was going to happen. I'm still searching for answers. It's one of those things that I've had to make peace with it, to say I'll never know. And I suppose it just takes you that long to work that out, because I have for so many years tried to take the blame off myself. I've had to try and work out why it happened and how it happened and who and why and every question in the world. But as the day actually happened, I was asleep, and the young fella had woken me up at just after 1:30, and he was saying, "Mummy, where are you? Where are you?" And I thought she was in bed next to me, and I rolled over, and she wasn't there. So I said, let's go and find her. So I picked him up, and we're walking around all the rooms, and no, she's not in there, not in there. My eyes were hanging out. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't think anything was going to happen. I just thought she was in a different part of the house. Mm. So we went downstairs, and that's where the laundry was, and I thought that she was down there. But as I opened the door, I saw her, and she'd used an electrical cord to wrap it around her neck, and she was hanging from the rafters. And my initial thought was to throw the young fella as far as I could. I didn't want him to see his mum like that. At the time, I thought I could probably handle it, but I think later I found out I probably couldn't. But I felt better that he didn't see it. And, I've said this numerous times that, I'm a big, tough footy player that played lots of rugby league and, whatever, but that knocked me for six. The physical pain that I felt as I saw her in that position, it was like a freight train had hit me. It was like a truck had hit me. It was like my whole chest had been slashed open. My legs couldn't move. Just the pain on the inside was indescribable. I was screaming at her, just crying, asking why, what is this? What's happened? Like, I thought I was in a dream. I really did. And I went to try and pick her up, to try and take the weight off her. It just wasn't working. I couldn't get the cord from around her neck. I eventually ran upstairs and got a kitchen knife and cut that, and then commenced CPR. And eventually, there was a lot of detail in terms of that, but after a while I worked out that it wasn't happening. I decided to go outside to try and find Clark. I don't know if it was 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. I have no idea. Time just stood still for me. And I ended up picking him up, ringing my mum and dad. I rang a mate, and then rang the police as well and the ambulance, and said, come and help me. Come and do what you have to do. I don't know. I was a little bit lost. And obviously things just spiraled from there. But one thing that came out of that particular day was a couple of years later. It was 6 years later when I spoke to the young fella when he was 10. And I said to him, and the parents actually said, he actually now wants to know what happened that day. We think he's old enough and he's asking questions. And I told him pretty much everything that, what I've said now. And he said to me, but why was the big black dog pinning me up against the wall? And I said, mate, we didn't have a dog. There was no dogs in our street. I didn't see a dog. It took me years and years to work out what he meant by that. And I've now worked out, whether it's true or not, it's what I believe, is that Karen's black dog had actually left her soul and had pinned him up against the wall and either making him safe or has transferred into him and I, because I think that was a really, really important moment in the day. And one of the messages that I do say out of all of this is that if you think that you are going to leave this world because you're a burden on people, because you got the black dog, just remember that it's going to go into your loved ones when you leave. And we've got to live with it for the rest of our lives.
That is such strong imagery that you've just mentioned there, Todd. And it is that ripple effect that it does have when someone chooses to take their own life, that it does leave an imprint on everyone who is left behind.
It does. It does. It's been 25 years, 26 years now for me. I've spent many of those years asking questions, searching for some sort of answers. I still don't have them. I've had to make peace with it, to say that I've had to put it away and go, I'm never going to find it. It is what it is. Let it go. You've got to live your life now. And that was exactly why I decided to write a book, because I never used to be able to talk about this. And I thought it's time. I've got the maturity now. I've got the time in my head and time from work that I can now do something with it and write a story and tell my story, and hopefully it helps someone down the track.
It sounds like that it's taken you, as you said, some time to come to the position where you are now, to have that clarity and that maturity to write about your story. A lot of people don't ever get to look at their life in reflection in relation to this. What was the moment where you thought, you know what, I really have to write about my story so other people can learn?
I think it was when I left the police 2.5 years ago. It gave me a bit of time to reflect on it and remember it and try and think about it. It also coincided with when I left the job and I had to start my very first day with my new job. My mum had passed away, and I spent the night with her, and I was holding her hand, and she'd passed away. And it made me think right then and there that it made me it worried me that I was going to go down the same track as what I did when Karen passed away. You know, there were two very important people in my life that passed away, and I was concerned that I was going to spiral like I did with losing Karen. But I think with my maturity and what I'd learned, I said to myself, what would Mum be proud of? You know, she knew that I didn't handle Karen's death well, and she was always concerned, and she was always very caring and loving over it. And I thought to myself, you know, if she's looking down, I want to make her proud and say, you know, I handled it with dignity, I handled it with maturity, and didn't go down the dangerous lines that I did when Karen died 25 years earlier. So that was something that made me sort of think, when I thought, okay, would Karen have been proud of what I did when she passed away? I don't think she would have. I think it made me decide, okay, I need to write something about this. I want to tell my story and I want to get it out there. It made me sort of also realise that I need to open up and be vulnerable to people, because I'd been so insular. I'd been keeping it to myself. I was ashamed of it. I was afraid of telling people. I was also just so worried of what people would think of me. And I don't know if it's maturity, the age bracket I am now, you know, hitting 50 a couple of years ago, and where I absolutely don't give one rat's what people think of me anymore. And it feels pretty good.
I have to say, it is quite liberating as you get older, the less you care about what other people think of you. But you mentioned that you felt ashamed and afraid at that time. Why were those emotions that you were feeling, especially ashamed? What was that coming from, do you think?
Well, the way that I looked at it was it really hits someone's self-esteem when a person chooses to end their life rather than be with you. It's the ultimate breakup. We have no recourse. You don't know if it was you. You don't know if it was anyone else. You don't know if it was just them that made that decision. You don't know. But your self-esteem gets a real knock around where you go, well, this person would rather kill themselves than be with me. And it takes you a while to work out that that's not the case. But because you're in such grief and your brain's not working correctly, that's what you think. And you think of a million other things as well. And I was ashamed of that. I blamed myself for so many years that, albeit I was only a police officer for 2 years or 2.5 years, I felt that I probably should have seen something. I should have, I'm supposed to be trained to do it. I'm supposed to, all of these things. And I failed to see any signs whatsoever. So there was a lot of blame. There was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of shame. Yeah.
And when you made that decision to tell your story, how did you start, Todd? Like, did you just sit down at the computer or what? Talk me through it.
Yeah, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
The way that it started was I'd started reading ex-Queensland undercover cop books, Keith Banks and Mick Cachola, and there was another one, Dan Crowley, who played for Australia, rugby and stuff, and I was reading those ones, and I was just like going, oh God, I remember the good old days, undercover work and this and that, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. I read them back to front twice and 3 times sometimes, and I initially started thinking that I wanted to write an undercover book, but then I also realised that in one of my, counselling, many counselling sessions that I'd had over the past 20 years, one of the counsellors had said to me, write down everything that happened on that particular day, 1st of January 2000. And it was just sitting in my top drawer. It was gathering dust. I hadn't opened it in years. And what's in the book is exactly what's on that piece of paper. I put it in exactly how it was. And for some reason, I just had this light bulb moment where I went, how can I sort of merge them? How can I make them together? And then I was talking to one of my cousins, which I'm really good friends with, and I sort of said, I've got this idea of writing a book, about when, my undercover days, and he was right there with me throughout it, and he saw what was going on, and I said to him, I really think, I was on a bit of a death wish back then, I wasn't sort of acting real smart, was I? I said, I'm a little bit, I was doing some stupid things, wasn't I? He goes, duh, we all saw that. Like, we knew that you were not well and you were not going well, but we couldn't stop you. And it sort of just went from there. And I went, well, Donnie was on a death wish. He didn't want to die. He just didn't want the pain. I didn't want the pain. And Donnie was a representation of me trying to get through life and get over that pain and hopefully get through it. But Donnie was that reckless and he was in that much pain that he threw himself into undercover work and did things that probably shouldn't have been done by a normal undercover person. They went through doors and did things that you probably shouldn't have done, but I had reckless abandonment that I didn't care what happened to me. And I had numerous guns to my head. I had a $100,000 Vietnamese triad hit out on me. I had, knives. I had all these things. And not one of them did I care about because I didn't really care what happened to me. And I suppose what I'm trying to say through this book is that now, I've got a beautiful wife now and I've got a son. I've got a great job outside of the police. My life's great now. It really, it's taken me a while to get through it. And it's been great for a long time. But I wanted to get that message out to say, everyone goes through hard times in their lives and, mine was hard, but it's probably not, there's people that have probably gone through harder, but I just want the message to get out there to say, life is good and you really, really can. If you work at it And if you realise that, there's some really nice parts about it and do the right stuff and work at it, life can be good. And you just got to expect that at times things aren't going to go well.
And can I ask you about that time where Karen had just died and you have Clark as a 4-year-old and you've just started, 2.5 years into the police force at that stage?
Yeah.
You obviously probably didn't have much time off work and had to go straight back to work, I'm assuming.
No, I was pretty lucky.
Okay.
I was allowed to have 3 months off.
Oh, that's
on
great.
leave. Well, I think it was good, but it was also bad because
Yeah, okay.
I then just started drinking.
Yeah, right.
That gave me the opportunity to drink at any time of the day, any night, any time. There was no structure. There was nothing. And it really started a bad process for me. And what I also say in my book that I wrote is, this book is not about what to do when you go through a tragedy. It's just as much as what not to do as well. And I think that I found, too many answers in the bottom of a bottle, and there are certainly things that I wish I didn't do now.
You've obviously written about them in the book, but tell me what some of those things that you perhaps regret that you do mention in the book when you look back on it now.
Well, I drank all day, every day. Pretty much that was the only way that I could cope. I engaged in just reckless behaviour. I got in fights. I hated the world. I hated everyone. I hated things that I used to love. The world didn't make sense to me anymore. Everything that I believed, I questioned and didn't agree with anymore. I know that when I did go back to work, I lived on the north side of Brisbane. So after this had happened down the Gold Coast, I'd moved back to my sister's place over at the Gap in the north side of Brisbane. And I was working at Indooroopilly Police Station. And I would, for example, I'd drive home through this place called the Gap Creek Road. And it was a bush sort of road with no lights whatsoever. And I would just play, even after I'd be drinking as well. And I'd turn the lights off on my car and I'd do the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then turn them back on and see if I was still on the road. Like little things like that, like just stupidity. I couldn't even think of doing that now. But that's how much I was reckless. But yet nothing ever happened. I was, maybe I did have something or someone looking over me. I don't know.
And what was the point, Todd, where you realised that you couldn't continue behaving in that manner?
There was a couple, and it's taken me many, many times of sort of falling off, getting back on again, falling off, getting back on. It hasn't been a simple ride. It hasn't been an easy or clean sort of thing. It's been quite messy. But one of the first ones was in undercover. I'd been doing it for 18 months. And I'd done this job in the valley where it was just a cold start where you sort of started buying drugs. Yeah. And it was MDMA. It was just pills. And it was just a fella who had fell on hard times as well. He had a broken marriage and so forth. And he just bought from the wrong bloke one night and we became mates and then he became a target. And unfortunately he got himself into a thing with the QPS where he was now sold that many drugs to me. He was looking at a trafficking charge and he got arrested and charged. And obviously he was told that I was the undercover cop. So he rang me one day and it was the first time after he got arrested. And I thought he was going to give me a bit of a spray and go, I always knew you were a narc, how could you, double cross me, all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't that at all. He'd actually called me to say that he was standing on the cliffs at the Brisbane River on the Fortitude Valley at New Farm sort of area and he was going to jump and he said, can you tell my kids I love them and blah, blah, blah. And I said, mate, no. Where are you? Exactly where are you? So I raced exactly to where he is. You sort of half knew that he wasn't going to do it because most people weren't going to do that. But anyhow, I was a bit reckless as well and grabbed his hand and I said, well, if you're going to do it, let's do it. And I said, come on, let's jump. I put one foot over the edge and he goes, hey, what the hell are you doing? And he was gobsmacked. He's going, whoa. And I said, what, mate, you going to do this? Like you said you were going to do it. Let's do it. And I said, come on, 1, 2, 3, let's go. And he yanked me back and he goes, no, I don't really want to do this. And I said, oh, why would you say you're going to do it then? We fell on the ground and, we ended up crying and we ended up talking for about 3 hours after that. And he was telling how much he couldn't do it to his kids and his ex-wife and his family and his mum and dad's and it wasn't until then that it hit me where I went, phew, it's exactly what I've been doing. I didn't realise I was doing it. I was just in the zone. I was just that angry at the world. I was just so unhappy and I was just so missing Karen and in so much pain that I was just on this freight train that just wasn't stopping. And that was the first time where I'd sort of pulled up a bit and went, hang on, I've got to stop what I'm doing here. This is stupid. And I remember going home to my safe house and just sitting by myself and I cried for hours. And it was the first time I'd really cried in a long time. And it made me realise, yeah, okay, you got to stop this. You really got to stop this. And, I'd only had about 6 months left in the undercover world after that. And I do recall I started sort of being a little bit more cautious than what I used to be. So that was a really good kick up the arse for me.
What's also interesting about that story for someone who doesn't know anything about the undercover world or police work was that it's interesting that someone who you had seen as a target, so obviously was getting information about and building a case against, you had also developed such a good relationship with this person that you were the one that they called when they were feeling like that.
Yep. Yeah, no, it makes you feel pretty shit about yourself. You feel like you really did double cross him, but I genuinely did like the fella and he obviously did like me and we had formed a very good connection. But he'd gone through, a similar feeling as myself where he hated the world. He had estranged a lot of his friends and family and he really had no one left. And I was his only other mate.
It says a lot about the tight bonds that you must create when you're doing this undercover work. How long are you working on cases when you were doing this sort of work, Todd?
Any time from 3 months to 9 months was probably my times. I felt that there wasn't too many that I formed great bonds with them. There was a lot that I was very happy to put in jail, but there was a small amount of people that I did actually really like. But the rest of them were, there were some pretty low sort of people and I was quite happy to do that job.
And it seems like it must have been a period of time where you had such sort of duplicity going on because you were a policeman yet being undercover. You were a policeman yet also drinking every day. Like there was a lot going on with you at that time, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was, yeah. I look at undercover as it allowed me to have a full release and just not be me for a while. I enjoyed being Donnie because Donnie was carefree. He had no worries in the world, where Todd had a lot of baggage, a lot of stuff that he was trying to process. And I think Donnie allowed Todd to just be free for a while. I grew my hair long. I got earrings, I got eye rings, I got tattoos, I got all these sort of things that, to fit in the persona of it. And it sort of allowed me to just not be the person I was used to being, which was liberating for a while. And then I sort of cleaned it all up after that and went back to being who I was and then started the healing process, to be honest with you.
It's one of the very few roles that it sounds like you can, in that situation, be paid for that escapism and create an entire other persona where you don't have to face the reality of what you were dealing with, as Todd, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I am very lucky that was the case. Yeah, it allowed me to eventually have the deposit to buy a house later, and that sort of started the recovery of, losing pretty much everything to start again. So it was a bit of a bonus.
So when you had that moment in the safe house where you found yourself crying and really sort of looking at where you were at that point in time, what were the next steps for you? Like, where do you go from there?
I don't know. I just remember picking myself up and saying, okay, well, tomorrow's the next day. And I just know that I just had changed. I'd changed massively. I didn't go and do stupid things anymore and basically just rolled into, I rolled down to the sort of the end of the undercover world. And I talk about it in my book where I did a job on, it took me down to Sydney where I had to do an undercover job on some cops down in Sydney that had a pool press and they were drug dealers. And it had a bit of a funny ending where they always knew that I was an undercover cop and set me up and made me have some drugs and I didn't sleep for a couple of days. That was a way to sort of finish things off. It wasn't too dangerous. It wasn't that bad. It was just a fun sort of finish where I knew that there was probably no danger because everything was sort of out in the open. But finishing after that sort of started a whole new world for me. Getting back to normality was almost impossible. I've gone from living in Sydney in a high-rise overlooking Hyde Park, driving a BMW, being in strip joints every night, just living a criminal's world, and then of answering phones at Crime Stoppers from 8 to 4.
Wow, that's quite the shift.
Yeah, it didn't go down well. I remember, you live that life for so long, you keep that attitude up where you're anti-police, you're very criminal-minded because you have to sort of live in that world and be believed. And I remember, a bloke just rang Crime Stoppers and it was obviously unprofessional of me, but, that was my mindset at the time. And he was telling me about, he was dobbing on people smoking drugs next door. And I started saying to him, mate, you know what happens to, dogs, mate? They get killed, all that sort of shit. And I was like yelling at him, like, because I thought I was still in that world. And,
right.
And the senior sergeant raced over, grabbed the phone and gave it to someone else and said, come for a walk down the road, Todd. Holy hell, are you okay? He goes, I don't think we'll get you to answer phones anymore, right? How about we just get you to do some filing? It took a long time to get back to normal world, yeah.
Yeah. Not exactly customer 101 on that one.
No,
customer service.
No.
But that would that probably have been the first real indication that because I'm assuming that you were pretty much by yourself all the time, quite autonomous in the role when you were undercover. So then to be working in a call centre, it would have been it was only a matter of time before you stood out, Todd.
Yeah. I remember they said, make sure you're there at 8 o'clock because the whole idea was to get you back into normal life with some structure and as easy as possible. It's supposed to be. But I hadn't woken up before 8 o'clock in years. So I think I rocked up there, 20 past 9 and I had no idea about what the time was. And I said, I thought I was early. I'm sorry. So, yeah, it was a big change. Yeah.
I'm sure they got a shock too.
It's funny, I've ran into people over the years and they said, oh, geez, I remember you when you came back from undercover. And I said, I don't recall that at all. And I said, yeah, you went well. You weren't you weren't in a good space. I went, oh. Yeah.
And how does that make you feel when you hear those stories? And certainly your cousin was very much aware about the fact that you were spiralling out of control after Karen's death. Like, was there anything that anyone could have said or done for you at that stage that would have helped?
I don't think so, no. I've sort of thought about that over the years. I can't think of anything where I would have gone, yep, okay, I believe you. I was in that much pain and I just hated what had happened to me that I was just on a destructive mode. And I don't know, that was one light bulb moment where it happened on the bridge, but on the cliff because we're looking at the bridge, and I'm sort of going, I wonder what else had happened. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just time. You can't keep living like that forever. You only got a certain amount of lives, really.
And physically, it must have been taking a toll as well, carrying all of that load of what you were carrying, as well as just living that lifestyle, I'm assuming.
Yeah, when you say physically, like I remember putting on like 25 kilos because I was just drinking all the time, eating T-bone steaks for lunch and dinner, just living in pubs all day, every day. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way I felt. I know that when I sort of did finish it, I sort of got back to trying to be fit again, trying to play footy again. It took me a while to get back to it, but it took me a while. But I knew that fitness was certainly a way to get my life back into shape. I was very lucky that I also met another wonderful woman, which we're still married to now, and we had a young boy, and he's 20. You know, that certainly was a catalyst for me to get myself back on track as well. You know, when he was born, it made me realise that it's not about me anymore. I gave myself a big kick up the arse, and it made me realise that this young fella doesn't give a shit what happened to me 5 years ago. He needs a dad that's present. He needs a dad that is going to be there for him. And I think I did my best. I certainly wasn't perfect. I felt, as I said earlier, I fell off many, many times, but I kept on fighting, and I kept on getting back on the horse, and I think that we've done a pretty good job to where we are now. So,
and just talk us through what those sort of years looked like for you. So it seems like that there was a 5 years between when Karen died to when you had your son, and that period of time, there was obviously a period of transition. And then, as you said, that there seems to have always been, you know, not a linear process on the way through, or a linear pathway. It's been bumpy along the road. What are the things that have you found that work for you that have kind of brought you back to your purpose, or why you keep doing what you're doing now?
It's funny now that we now use Donnie as, you know, the symbol of my PTSD. That when I get irritable, when I feel a little bit down or whatever, which is not that often anymore, hopefully, fingers crossed, is that, you know, either my wife or a friend or myself will go, oh, Donnie's nipping at your heels again. And I've sort of had that, I got that in check now, and I know what to do, and I know that, you know, fitness is a big thing now. Just have a different mindset. I've had to focus on my sleeping. Leaving the police, I've noticed going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, having a good solid 8 to 9 hours sleep, and eating healthy. I also found, you know, I was involved in rugby league because I played football, and then I got involved in coaching. And it started with junior coaching with, you know, under 12s all the way, where last year I was coaching A grade, and every year of that was always volunteering. I never got paid for any bit of the coaching and being involved in it. And I just found that whenever I felt a little bit down on myself or whatever, volunteering and helping people is what gives you purpose, and being selfless. And that's how I felt. It gets me through things. And I find that's when you have the ultimate happiness in life, where it's not about you. You forget about yourself and you focus on other people. And I believe that that's the key to happiness in my life.
And you say that you've come to some sort of level of acceptance, and I'm not even sure whether that's the right word to use, whether you have come to that sort of level of that, but about Karen's death and the amount of questions that you were asking. How did you get to that point, Todd?
I think it was when I hit 50 and my mum passed away, and my dad just passed away in January, and it was both in close succession, but the catalyst was mum. And then I started seeing a lot of my parents' family friends passing away, and they they're in their 70s, mid to late 70s, and it really gives you that panic where you go, things are real. Shit's getting real. I've only got 20-something years left to go if I'm going to follow what my family has done and what everyone else that I've ever known seems to be doing the same. Whether you pass away or whether your quality of life is different, I've really only got 20-something years of quality life. And I said, I've been carrying this around, and it's been bringing me down for so long. I said, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I've got to get it off my back. And I think that this is the way to do it, because 5 or 10 years ago, I could not have said Karen's name without crying. And now I'm reliving this story over and over, and it makes me feel good about saying it. And it's a really, really healthy way of getting it off my back.
It's interesting. It's like you're volunteering your story to help others again.
Well, I think I am, but I'm being selfish and I'm trying to help myself as well, because I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to live my next 20 to 25 years as the best 25 years of my life.
And what advice would you give to people who find themselves in a situation where a partner or a loved one that's close to them has taken their own life?
Oh, it's so hard to give advice. I mean, God, you can say what you should do and what shouldn't do, but your brain just takes over. It really, and your heart takes over. There's no right or wrong. Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to feel however you want to feel. But at some stage, you've got to get yourself out of the ditch and realise that that person made that decision because of themselves, not because of anyone else. And you've got to start living your life again.
And it sounds like you've had some exceptional support from professionals along the way as well with counselling.
I have, yeah. I've tried a lot. I can't say that, there's not one thing that's worked perfectly, but I've certainly always tried to do everything I can. And I think, along with that, it's not until when you're ready to move on and ready to go and ready to do something is that when it actually all comes together. And I don't know, I can't put a finger on. Sometimes you just wake up and you go, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not playing this game. I'm going to do it. I'm going to fix myself. That's it. And I think at the end of the day, like everyone, where they say, you're not going to change until you want to. You have those moments where you go, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Mm.
And living with complex PTSD, what does that look like in every day for you, Todd?
To me, it's no problem. It's just the people around me, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, oh, that's true. Yeah. Because you're right. Like what you were saying before is that you now refer, your friends and your family now refer and give you hints when Donnie starts come nipping at your toes and your heels again.
Yeah, and I actually notice when I have a really poor sleep, I can be really irritable. I can start hating everything. I get snappy. Yeah, little things like that. Yeah, and I noticed that. But one thing that I have noticed, playing rugby league over the years is, I've got a plate in my knee. I've got a plate in my arm. I've had numerous fractured eye sockets where I see double out of the peripheral on my left eye. And the way that I view the brain injury that happened because of the trauma through no fault of my own is no different to the injuries that I've had on my leg, my arm, and my eye. None of them are perfect again, and they're not going to work exactly how they used to, but they still work quite well. The way that I look at it is that my brain's no different. My brain had a trauma through something that I had no control over, which was obviously Karen. And then I'd have to say that subsequently it was my fault after that, what I did, but it is what it is. However, the injury that's happened to my brain is still manageable. It's not the end of the world. It's not something that I'm ashamed of anymore. I used to be. I used to think that it was, a mental health disorder, but it's a muscle or organ in my body that had trauma to it. And it's no different to any other part of my body. And that's the stigma that I want to get out there to the rest of the world that's listening, that it's no different to having a broken arm, no different to having a fractured eye socket. It's the same thing. You know, I've got that much metal in my body. It's no different.
Yeah.
They all still work, and my brain still works.
Yeah.
But you got to do the right things. You got to do the work to it to make sure that it works by eating healthy, exercising, reading, sleeping well. Sleep's one of the most important things for me.
And I think that that's something that's really good to remind people is that, you know, research nowadays tells us that, you know, when we do suffer trauma, our brain is impacted directly and can be seen on MRIs and scans that there has been a trauma that has affected it. And also, you know, research into epigenetics and what that does for when trauma affects our DNA as well. And that's something that we're just starting to understand now. So it's great that you're actually raising awareness of that it is something that is an injury like any other injury.
What I've noticed since I've, you know, written the book and released it and discussed it even before I did that is it's been generating conversation, especially with blokes. And I've just been blown away by the amount of times that it's opened up problems that you would not have known that my friends or colleagues or acquaintances have had, but it's needed someone to be vulnerable, to open up and share their problem. And I've usually used that by saying, here's my book, this is my story. And next thing you know, they're telling me about, you know, something that, you know, has concerned them or their issue in their life. And it's been amazing. It really has been a great journey. And that is probably one of the most proudest things about it is that I've now got all of these fellas that just say to me, you know, I'm proud of you and thank you for doing that. It makes me feel comfortable being able to do it. You know, I've looked at you. At no stage did I ever thought you'd be the sort of person that would do this. And yeah, I've just said, well, hey, I think the real strength is being vulnerable. I think the real strength is being, you know, not being a fraud, telling people and being open to your mates or your colleagues or whatever and telling them exactly what's going on in your life, because everyone has problems. No one's going to go through life without an issue, without a hiccup. And we all need to be there for each other.
It's so true, Todd. And, you know, death is the one guarantee that we all have, and it comes in numerous shapes, sizes, and, you know, forms. And so does our response to that and the grief that goes with it. So I really appreciate you being really vulnerable and honest with your story with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Todd.
Thank you. I've loved it. It's really good. And I've loved your podcast. It's something that I've sort of followed for many years is, you know, the dark life of death and the positives, the negatives. I do have a positive about it. And I actually do say to people, you know, we're all fearful of dying. But what if wherever they go or wherever we go is a million times better than here? You just don't know, do you?
No, we don't. And it's one of those things where when I speak to people about death, it's never actually about death. It's about everything we do up until that point and the impact of that death on everyone thereafter. So we just need to live well.
Exactly. And love people and enjoy life and be kind to people.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Todd. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been great.